One simple question is tearing NHL fans apart. This question builds identities and shapes families and future generations. What is the best NHL franchise? The easiest way to answer this is by simply looking at Stanley Cup wins a team has and using it to say that the Montreal Canadiens are the best team all time with their 23 Cup wins. However, there are significant issues with this methodology. The first issue is that it doesn't really encapsulate how often teams make the playoffs. For example, I think many fans would agree that a team that wins the Cup 10 times in 100 years, but then is a bottom feeder in the NHL the other 90 years, is nowhere near as good as a team that in the same 100 years won 5 Cups, was always in the playoff conversation, and maybe had 1 or 2 years where they were at the bottom of the league. The second issue is time. The Canadiens have been around for over 100 years, so they've had that long to grow and get as many Cup wins as possible. Whereas a team like the Seattle Kraken, even if they've won the Cup 100% of the time since they've been in the league, they would have less than a quarter of the total Stanley Cup wins that the Montreal Canadiens have because they haven't been around that long. Thirdly, we're not even factoring in regular season success when we look at Stanley Cup wins. I think many other fans would agree that a team that is always on the bubble is much better than a team that is always a first team out in the playoff race. So since we've knocked out the biggest way people determine the best NHL team, how can we actually go about answering this question? One word: an algorithm. This allows us to factor in what we want and weight it by how we want. That way we can get a simple numerical value for each team and rank them accordingly. And don't worry, half of you probably heard algorithm and said, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? It's simple. It's third grade math. Your third grader could do it if they wanted to. So in this video, I want to walk you through the process of designing this formula to numerically calculate team success, then conclude with the top 5 worst and top 5 best NHL franchises of all time. Chapter 1, devising the formula. So what does it take to be the best franchise of all time? To me, there are multiple factors, but we talked about this in the intro. There's 2 main categories: regular season success and playoff success. Now, one easy metric we can use is total point. A team that wins a lot of games generally is better than a team that loses a lot of games. So since the NHL has a point system, we should definitely use it. However, this creates a problem. A team who earns 100 points over a season, but only wins by slim margins and loses in blowout is a lot different than a team that barely loses games in close fashion, but when they win big. To remedy this problem, I propose we add in net goals. We should add in the net goals a team has over the season, which will also add in factors like star power, goaltending, and all the other intangibles. This is because a good goalie is not going to let in a lot of goals, and a lot of star power is going to lead to more goals for your team. So the better those factors are, the more your net goals are going to be. Let's go ahead and add in our net goals to our points earned for each team to get a point goals metric. That's the solution, right? That's done, right? We're done. We can go on to the playoffs? Not quite. We still haven't considered one key factor. The NHL loves money, and in order to make more money, they want to add more games to the regular season. Even this upcoming NHL season is going to have more games, so while net goals might not be a significant difference, the sheer addition of games is going to inflate the numbers in the later seasons as opposed to the earlier seasons. So ultimately, I think that we should divide our point goals metric by the number of games a team played that season. Let's go ahead and call this metric our regular season score, as it should be a good metric for us to use to gauge regular season success. Before we set this in stone, let's go ahead and test this formula with 3 teams: the Buffalo Sabres, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Vancouver Canucks. Starting with the Lightning and the Sabres, these 2 teams were in a massive dogfight with each other over the Atlantic Division crown, alongside Montreal, but let's focus on these other 2. Ultimately, Buffalo came out of the division, but if we look at our regular season formula, the Sabres played 82 games and earned 108 points from wins and overtime losses. The Sabres also had a net goals of plus 47. Plugging these values into our formula, we get the Buffalo Sabres with a regular season score of 1.9042. Meanwhile, the Tampa Bay Lightning ended their regular season with 106 points and a net goals of plus 59. Plugging these numbers into that same formula, we get a regular season score for the Lightning of 2.1022, slightly better than the Sabres, and I think that would pass the eye test. And thirdly, let's take a look at the worst team this past season based on sheer point totals, the Vancouver Canucks. They finished the season with 58 points and a net goals of negative 100. Using the same formula, the Canucks get a regular season score of negative 0.5122. Ultimately, I would say this looks pretty solid. I say it passes the eye test, and we know that generally our scores are going to fall anywhere from a +2 to maybe a +3 to a -1, somewhere in there for most teams. That information is very important for our next step. Chapter 2.
Don't talk about
the playoffs. So far, we've only discussed regular season success, which is important, but let's talk about the most important metrics that Canadiens fans use to cry out that their team is the best: the Stanley Cup playoffs. Since winning the Stanley Cup is a big accomplishment, we should definitely weight the Stanley Cup wins to be bigger than regular season scores. This much is obvious. However, and Canadiens fans in the room, you guys have your trigger warning here, winning the Stanley Cup in a 6-team league is much different than winning it in a 32-team league. There are more teams that have the chance to have a miracle run, talent gets dispersed across more teams and less concentrated, and the NHL today has more parity than ever. Just look at the Eastern Conference in the playoff race this last year, and you'll see it. Therefore, winning the Cup this year is a much taller task than winning it back in the original 6 era. So how do we balance out for this factor? Well, I decided the best way to balance this is to tie in the amount of points you get for winning a Stanley Cup to the size of the league directly. The big question now is, what do we set that ratio at of teams to points? And to go about this, I thought let's go ahead and start with today's game and then work it retroactively. So I want to make a nice even number to allow for generally easy calculations while also being a significant bonus. The way I decided to set this was by giving a team 1 point per 8 teams in the NHL. This provides a nice 4-point bonus for winning the Stanley Cup in 2026. So overall, I'd say this is looking pretty good, but there's also something else that we should definitely factor in for teams like the Minnesota Wild, who always make it to the dance but fail to go anywhere, and the Carolina Hurricanes, who up until this year always seem to collapse by the Eastern Conference Finals. And that is how far you make it in the playoffs. The best way I thought to factor this in is by giving a bonus at all levels of playoffs based on where you lose. So you'll see there's a simple graphic here on screen, but to make this happen, I just halved the amount of playoff points you get by the round you lose. So in the 2026 playoffs, for example, losing in the Stanley Cup Finals will give you half of the 4-point bonus, or 2 points. Losing in the Conference Finals gives you 1 point. Losing in the second round gives you half a point. And losing in the first round, like the LA Kings, just showing up and getting blown out, you get a bonus of 0.25 points. These values will be definitely dependent on the size of the league, as does the Stanley Cup Finals bonus, but I do think this provides enough of a boost to making the playoffs without it being overbearing and them being the end-all be-all. Chapter 3: How to Balance Out for Time. So before we can discuss the best and worst teams of all time, we need to consider one more factor, that being how long a team has been around. Because if we just add up the points for each team each year, then teams like the Canadiens will inevitably be the best because they've had significantly more time to rack up points than Seattle or Vegas, just due to being around for longer. And to back this up, being around longer does not make you better necessarily. Look at the Cleveland Browns of the NFL. They've existed in one form or another almost continually since 1944. But that doesn't mean that they're better than a team like the Buccaneers or Seahawks who came around later. My simple solution for time is just to rank teams on an average score per year. So take each team's score for the season with any playoff bonuses, divide it by the number of years they've played, and that is our simple metric we're going to use. This will also generally tell us who is maintaining their level of success and who has been up and down and up and down and all around. But now it's time to get into the moment you all have been waiting for. Chapter 4: Results. So here we go. The top and bottom 5 teams in the NHL according to the math. Since I want to end on a positive note, let's go ahead and start with the 5 worst teams. Now note, I will be using data that is current as of the end of the conference finals of the 2026 playoffs, so the Stanley Cup results are not in for Vegas or Carolina, but I don't think it'll make much of a difference. So starting with our bottom 5 teams, at number 28, we have the Vancouver Canucks at a 0.967 points per year. At number 29, we have the Winnipeg Jets at a 0.925 points per year. At number 30, we have the Seattle Kraken at a 0.798 points per year. At number 31, we got the Columbus Blue Jackets at a 0.653 points per year. And at number 32, the worst team in the NHL according to the numbers is the Utah Mammoth / Arizona Coyotes at 0.618 points per year. Yes, I lumped them together even though Utah's a new franchise, so to speak, because all the assets from Arizona got transferred to Utah. It's the same team, just a new franchise, but it's the same group. Moving on now to our top 5 NHL teams of all time. At number 5, we have the Edmonton Oilers at a 1.704 points per year. At number 4, we got the Boston Bruins at a 1.8 points per year. At number 3, the Philadelphia Flyers at 1.816 points per year. At number 2, we got the Montreal Canadiens at 2.09 points per year. See, Habs fans, you're still up on the list. And at number 1, I just want to end it all right now. The Vegas Golden Knights at 2.427 points per year. So for those of you guys who do want to actually peruse the numbers as well, see where your team ranks, I will provide a spreadsheet link down in the description so you guys can go ahead and check it out for yourself. And let me know your thoughts down in the comments of this way of ranking teams. How would you actually improve this formula? I'm always open to suggestions, and if it's practical enough, I might just implement it into future years of the formula. Also, if you did enjoy this video, please just do me a huge favor. We have been on the road to 1,100 subscribers for what seems like forever now, and I'd love to be able to smash it with this video. So please go ahead, drop us a like, drop us a sub for more content like this. And with that, I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out and have a good one.